Hey friends, welcome back to Homestead on a Prayer. We're out here today on my deck in the container garden, and if you saw the recent video I posted of a container garden tour, which I'll link below in case you missed it, I'm sure you noticed that the container garden on my deck was kind of in need of some changes. A lot of the plants that I had growing for the summer, especially some tomato plants, were really diseased, not producing anymore, and it was just time to move on. So today we're having a little bit of a reset up here in the container garden up on my deck. Now you'll see a lot of the plants are going to stay. My peppers are going to stay, my basil's going to stay. Those plants are still really thriving. But I did earlier today, I did go ahead and pull out some tomato plants. I pulled out some bush beans that were done yielding. I dug some potatoes out of pots that were up here. And what we're going to do now is we are going to give these pots a little bit of a reset for fall. Now, I have been gradually moving into fall gardening mode for a while now. As the summer garden starts to wind down a little bit, really honestly, you want to be thinking about it before the summer garden really starts winding down, which is a bit of a challenge sometimes, especially in the heat of summer and the busyness of summer. You want to start planning your fall garden to kind of pick up the slack as soon as your summer garden stops yielding. You have your fall crops to kind of fill in the gaps there. The trick is to do this. Wow, my rooster is very talkative right now. He wants to make sure that you know he's here and that you know he's a rooster. So he's saying hi. Now, the trick is to find the balance between letting your summer crops go as long as possible to get the most harvest possible out of those, while still starting your fall crops early enough to make sure that we're able to get a harvest for those. Now, here in my area, it's early September. In my area here in Connecticut, our average first fall frost is mid-October. So I have just about a month and a half before my frost, which means that we are going to be planting only frost-hardy crops today. There are not a lot of crops that are going to yield in just a month and a half, so say about 40 days or so. And when you take into account the fact that we're past the summer solstice pretty significantly now, daylight hours are dwindling. It's going to take longer than the estimated maturity date for a lot of these crops to come to maturity, which means that I need things that will still keep yielding for me and still keep growing for me even after the first frost. So, honestly, I haven't completely planned what I'm going to do with these pots here, but I brought out a few containers of types of plants that can survive a frost. The first one I have here is Asian greens. You'll find that a lot of Asian greens are very cold hardy. Depending on your area, you may even be able to keep those going all winter long. In my area, that's probably a little unrealistic, but I should be able to keep them going at least well into the winter. Now, lettuce is another one that can be fall hardy, or frost hardy, I should say. So I have some lettuce here. You know what I think I'm actually going to do, though? I've started a lot of winter hardy lettuce out in my garden. We're actually in the middle of a heat wave right now. So I think what I'm actually going to do is plant a little bit of summer lettuce up here and just plan to harvest that on the earlier side. Now, cabbage is another plant that is frost hardy. Cabbage takes a little bit longer to mature than some of the other plants I have here, but I may give some cabbage a try and see if we're able to get some of that. Now, you'll notice as we go through these, some things that I am missing are broccoli and cauliflower. While it's true that those are frost hardy, I don't think that I have enough time. I don't think I have enough time for those to mature before it gets really cold and before we lose too much daylight for them to grow. So the only brassicas I have up here that I'm planning to start are cabbage and kale. The heading brassicas just take a little bit longer. So we'll try some kale as well. And then I just have a box of mixed greens. So we'll take a look at these pots here and figure out exactly what we're going to plant in these for hopefully a potential fall harvest. So I have 5 pots on my deck, just about this size here. As you can see, this is a pretty large size pot. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and plant a variety of things in these pots. Now I pulled out tomato plants and, as I said, some various other things from these pots. I did refresh the soil with some slow release organic fertilizer when I did that. Especially when you're growing in containers, this is also true of in-ground gardening, but especially when you're growing in containers, the resources in that container are limited, so it is really important to make sure that you refresh the nutrients in that container. So all of these pots that I pulled things out of, I did go ahead and add some organic fertilizer as well. So I think what I'm going to do with each of these pots is I'm probably going to plant maybe one cabbage plant in each pot and then try to surround it with some smaller things that might have a little bit quicker maturity. So I'll put a cabbage in here, and then I think I may surround it with, let's see, maybe we'll put a kale plant. I might put a couple summer lettuces that I'm hoping will grow fast for a quick harvest, and then we can pull those out, and then the cabbage, as it needs more space, we'll have it as we've harvested the lettuce. All right, so let's get planting and we'll see what we do. So I've got a few types of cabbage here. I've got early Jersey Wakefield, which we want to pay close attention to the days to maturity, especially as we get close to the first frost. This is 63 days. Now, we most likely do not have 63 days before our first fall frost. That might end up being okay though, because cabbage, as I said, is frost hardy. That doesn't necessarily need to yield before the first frost. So while it might be a bit of a risk to plant this, it's a risk that I would be comfortable taking. I also have this Savoy Perfection cabbage, and this says 90 days. So this one's going to be too long. So we're going to have to set this to the side. I also have Golden Acre cabbage. This doesn't have a maturity date on it, but I think this one is about between 50 or 60 days as well. I'll look that up and double check, and I'll put it up on the screen for you, but I think that's about 50 or 60 days. So that could be a possibility. I think in this pot here, we'll try planting a Golden Acre cabbage. I am going to plant 2 seeds in case one doesn't germinate, and then we'll surround it with some smaller plants. Now, brassica seeds, you usually want to plant about a 1/4 inch deep or so. You can see there's these little round seeds here. They're pretty small. So generally when you're planting seeds, you want to plant them about twice as deep as the seed is wide. That's just a general rule of thumb. We don't have to be too precise with that. So I planted 2 little cabbage seeds back here. I'll thin one out if they both germinate. Let's see. I think alongside that cabbage, I want to plant 1 kale plant. So I've got a couple possibilities here. I have a Russian red or ragged jack kale. I really like this kale a lot. This one is really cold hardy, yields well. Blue curled Scotch is another great choice. This is a really good one too. I think right now I'm going to go with this dazzling blue kale. This is a lacinato kale, which is a little bit more of an upright plant, a little bit of a narrower footprint. So I think that this will make a good complement with the cabbage. So I'm going to do the same thing with this. I'm going to pull out 2 seeds. I'm going to plant them close to each other, about a 1/4 inch deep. And then we'll go ahead and maybe I'll thin out one if they both germinate. Kale can handle being planted a little bit more closely, so I may not even thin this if they both germinate. I've got my cabbage planted over here. So we'll move over here. And about a 1/4 inch deep again, I'll plant my dazzling blue lacinato kale. Now, I think for the rest of this pot here, I think I'm going to fill it in with a mix of some lettuces. I don't know if I'm going to do specifically summer lettuce, but let's see what we have. So I've got this hyper red rumple waved lettuce, as you could probably figure out from the name. This is a really deep red lettuce with ruffled leaves, which I really like. So I think I'll plant a little bit of this around the edge of the cabbage, and maybe we'll mix it with, let's see. I've got this Freckles romaine lettuce, which is a green lettuce with red speckles. I think those will make a really pretty combination. They're both really delicious lettuces. So we're going to go ahead and add some of these to the pot. So when it comes to lettuce, I am not going to worry about spacing. I am going to be very generous with my sowing, especially this time of year, as if you've seen some of my other fall garden videos, you have heard me talk about how lettuce doesn't really like to germinate in the heat. So we're going to increase our chance of getting a respectable lettuce harvest by sowing pretty thickly. Now, I'm not planning on these lettuce plants growing to maturity and harvesting full-size heads. I'm basically just trying to sow these as baby greens. Now, you can see on here how thickly I've sowed this lettuce. We're just going to brush the dirt over it, and then we're going to make sure to keep this well watered until it germinates. So you can see that I obviously did not come into this with a really specific plan. I'm going to basically use the same approach with the other pots that I have freed up. I think I'm going to put 1 cabbage in each pot, as I said, probably 1 cabbage and 1 kale in each pot. And then depending on the pot, I'll do a mix of smaller plants, maybe some lettuces, maybe some other Asian greens, something like that. Now in this pot here, we had a nasturtium going. I left that in, and I left this puny little basil plant in. We're just gonna plant around them. So I think for this one, we did a golden acre cabbage in the previous one, in the previous pot. I think I'm going to do early Jersey Wakefield in this one. We'll see if we're able to get a harvest of this. We'll do 2 seeds again. In the back here, I'll plant these both about 1/4 inch deep, a couple inches apart. In this one, we're going to try a Ragged Jack kale plant, also known as a red Russian kale plant. So I'll take, oops, got a few too many seeds. We'll plant 2 seeds of this one as well. We'll just put these here right next to the nasturtium plant. We'll do some Marvel of 4 Seasons here. This is a really good butterhead type lettuce. It's green with a little bit of a red tinge. This one does really well in many different weather conditions, so we're going to plant some of this. And I'll also add in a little bit of the super red romaine as a contrast. You know, actually, I think in this pot I'll stick with only Marvel of 4 Seasons. Just as we did in the other pot, I'm going to sow this really thickly, not paying any attention to spacing. I'm just making a little groove in the soil and sprinkling the seed in. And we're just going to go ahead and cover it up. So it can be kind of hard to make the decision to pull out a plant when it is still producing. The tomato plants that I did pull out, while they really didn't look great, they did actually have some healthy new growth coming out the top of the plant. So it was a little bit painful to pull them out because I knew there was a chance I might get a little bit more yield from each of those plants. But what I ultimately did was weigh it out, and there was a chance I might not get any additional harvest from those plants, and if I did, it probably would have been maybe 1 or 2 tomatoes each at this point in the season. So I ultimately decided that my odds were higher of getting a better harvest if I pulled them out and replaced them with plants that can survive a frost. Now the cherry tomatoes, they probably will yield a fair amount more for me, probably not a lot. Probably, honestly, the objective right decision there would have been to pull those out as well and plant something else there. But I think what I'm actually going to do is leave those plants in place, and around the base of the plants I'm just going to sow some lettuce seeds or something like that that can just kind of intermingle with the tomato and grow together. I decided with my cherry tomato plants to do that. There were some other cherry tomato plants that really didn't look great. I almost pulled them out, but then I saw that they had new growth too. Now, the difference between those cherry tomato plants and the large tomato plants that I pulled, cherry tomatoes produce more fruit much more quickly. So I think I have a higher chance of getting more yield from those tomatoes than I did from the large tomatoes. So I'm just going to go ahead and I am going to plant the rest of the pots just like I planted these 2 pots here. I'm going to scatter some lettuce or green seeds at the base of those tomato plants, and then hopefully the next time I do a container garden tour I can show you guys some sprouts from what we planted today. Now, just to give you guys a couple more ideas of other plants that you can plant this time of year, we'll go through these containers and I'll just show you some other things that I'm planning to plant today. So arugula is a really great plant to grow this time of year, early spring, late summer into fall. Arugula grows really well in cold weather. Arugula really actually prefers not to grow in summer. So Swiss chard is another one. I've got a couple kinds of Swiss chard here. That would be good. Now spinach. Spinach is a little bit trickier because I find it takes longer to yield. One thing I do actually like to do with spinach is sow it a little bit later in the year, maybe in a couple weeks. What will happen is it will germinate and grow a little bit. I won't really get to harvest it this fall and winter, but what will happen is the plant will overwinter, and then first thing in the spring, before anything that I've planted has really had a chance to take off, that spinach will usually grow and thrive and give me a really early harvest in the spring. So sometimes I do that with spinach as well. But spinach I find is a little bit of a challenging crop because it takes longer to mature, but it really doesn't like heat. Now I'm just going to show you guys a couple of the Asian greens that I have planned. I will not be able to pronounce all of these. So for example, this one here, which is actually one of my favorites, but I have no idea how to pronounce that. So I'm just going to show you this packet. This would be another one that would be really good to grow. Now this is a type of pak choi. So pak choi is another one that does really well in cold weather. I have this here, which I believe is related to pak choi, or maybe it's a type of pak choi. This Chinese yellow heart. I did try growing this last year and I was not successful, so I'm going to try it again this year and see how it does. So I'm going to say that's a new one to me because I was not able to be successful with it last year. And here I have a purple pak choi. It's another great option. And then yet another type of pak choi. And I also have tatsoi here, which is another great Asian green as well. So those are lots of great options that do really well in cold weather. So I'm just going to go ahead and get all these pots planted. So thank you guys so much for hanging out on my deck with me today, my container garden, and getting yet another part of the garden ready for fall. Now, summer is hot, summer is overwhelming, summer is the season of garden burnout, and I get it. It is hard to think about the fall garden when you're in the midst of summer. But really now was the time to think about it if we want to make sure that we are able to actually get a harvest this fall. So I am hoping that I got this stuff planted in time, that it's not too late. And I will definitely keep you all updated about how this does. I will probably do another container garden tour fairly soon. If not, I'll at least do some sort of fall garden tour and I'll update you on how these pots are doing. So again, thank you so much for joining me. I hope that you are planning for a fall garden. I hope that your summer garden is still doing amazing, and I can't wait to see you soon. I'll see you next time.